Hello and welcome to this latest installment of Marketplace Tech's limited series, Decoding Democracy, where we're talking about how political information spreads online. I'm Lily Jamali. Today, I'm joined once again by Marketplace's senior Washington correspondent, Kimberly Adams. Great to see you, Kimberly. How you doing?
Good, Lily. Thanks for bringing me back.
Yeah, good to see you. Well, we are going to be looking back this time at how different platforms have been used by politicians over the years to amplify their political messaging, be it on mainstream media or on social media platforms. And the furthest back, Kimberly, that we're going to look back for a peek at when a sitting president stepped out of their traditional modes of communication with the American people is 1994. Remember that year?
Oof. Vaguely. I'm trying not to remember the fashion.
Well, this is when former President Bill Clinton went on MTV for a town hall to talk about, this was actually a very serious topic, violence in America. And he did this in front of a few hundred 16 to 20-year-olds. So this was when the 94 crime bill was up for debate. And despite the serious nature of the topic, the forum lent itself to ultimately some moments of humor, including this one.
Mr. President, the world's dying to know, is it boxers or briefs?
Usually briefs. I can't believe she did that.
I still can't believe she did that. That was an iconic moment. I have to say it doesn't reflect particularly well on my generation, Gen X, but that was the 90s in the MTV era for you.
Right. And, obviously that clip has so many different additional levels of connotation now these days and in the environment that we're in. And it was a wild moment and an unusual moment at the time, but it did represent something new. At the time, politicians didn't really have a good way to reach younger voters. And so long before social media platforms and things being able to send as a text blast to your phone, they had to kind of try to reach young people where they were. And at the time, that was MTV. MTV was the biggest game in town when it came to youth voter outreach or any kind of youth outreach at all. And that was the way that Clinton found a good strategy to amplify his political message.
Yeah. All right. Well, we called up Joshua Scacco, who he is a political communications professor. He's also the director of the Center for Sustainable Democracy at the University of South Florida. He said this moment that we just watched with Bill Clinton informed future presidents, highlighting how you have to kind of engage the American public on their terms, go where they are to get your message out to them. Here's what Professor Scacco had to say about how Clinton's successor, George W. Bush, adapted this idea.
George W. Bush had made particular changes to the White House website, had modernized outreach, had also been going into non-political spaces, particularly talk radio spaces, sports programming. He was a Texas Rangers guy, so would like to talk about baseball and relate that in a lot of ways to his leadership. And so he would relate his leadership values to the Texas Rangers to be able to relate to audiences outside of politics.
Notice how many times he said they're relate, because this is the big thing. And we really saw this transition from presidents being sort of distant and, being on high to trying to be where people are, like you were saying earlier. And, Bush was pre-social media, but I think Facebook was in its infancy around that time. But it was this attempt of this evolution of political messaging from TV to radio to cable TV, and then baby steps online.
Mm-hmm. The guy everyone would want to have a beer with, they would often say about him. Well, former President Barack Obama, it's important to note here, was the first political figure running for president of the United States with a presence on Facebook. And you could actually see, starting in the 2006 midterm elections, how your friends and family on Facebook were planning to vote. That was right around the time when they started. It was just, I think, weeks before the midterm elections where Facebook enabled this functionality where you could post who you were planning to support. And Obama, according to Josh Scacco, ended up adapting a lot of traditional presidential communication to other social media platforms. Let's watch.
Barack Obama, for instance, transitioned the weekly radio address, which had really been a Saturday morning audio routine since the Reagan administration, He transitioned it to a essentially Saturday YouTube address where he added visual components, where he was essentially looking at a camera and providing the sort of visual elements of the presidency and then placing them on YouTube.
But Kimberly, let's fast forward to now. We have X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and the newest entry on the scene, of course, I'm talking about TikTok. That platform is how a lot of people consume content now, whether it's gossip, whether it's news, whether it's political messaging and political information.
Yeah, there's an organization called NewsGuard, which is a watchdog group that tracks social media outlets and platforms when it comes to mis and disinformation. And they actually published a report right before the last midterm elections, highlighting how TikTok in particular has kind of become the new Google, especially for younger folks when it comes to trying to find information. But people of all ages are in many cases going to TikTok first, trying to find new information and actively searching on certain topics. And it isn't quite as, how shall we say, easy to identify authoritative voices sometimes on these newer platforms, especially when you have people who are just getting into them.
Yeah, I think this is probably news to people, certainly of my generation, that the search functionality on TikTok is pretty impressive. And I only know this from talking to people much younger than me, but that is how they get a lot of their information, even when they're seeking it out, not just being fed it by an algorithm. So that's a really important point. So in that report, the authors analyzed more than 500 videos based on searches that contained neutral terms like, quote, 2022 election, and 19.4% of the results they found were misinformation. Jack Brewster is one of the authors of that report, and he said 2 years later, in this election cycle, things have been looking the same, but with a twist, namely political misinformation on TikTok. Let's watch.
So the problem with misinformation right now on TikTok is mainly artificial intelligence. So it was already pretty bad back in 2020 and 2022 when there were major elections here in the US, but it's been turbocharged by artificial intelligence lately. And namely, that's through audio AI tools. So now anyone who has access to the internet can create a TikTok without their voice, and they can do it at scale. So I can pump out more videos, and that's great for many people, but it's not great for our democracy in the sense that it can also turbocharge misinformation. So more and more people are creating videos using these tools and spreading misinformation at scale.
I feel like we're kind of coming full circle on this whole limited series that we've been doing, because we started out talking about deep fakes and AI and misinformation. And, you know, we've just kind of been through the history of how information spreads online when it relates to politics and election. And here we are in a situation where people are actively trying to get good information about the election, but it's harder than it ever was to find authoritative voices and to know whether or not what you're finding online is true. And so you really do have to be careful. And I'll emphasize this, as we've been saying over and over again throughout the series: know your sources, know where your information is coming from, and you got to watch out for those deep fakes.
Yes. And Kimberly, I think that TikTok has really been in the limelight here, is getting a lot of scrutiny, but it's not just TikTok. And I just want to underscore that we've seen this type of political misinformation play out on other platforms, video on Instagram being one. All this to say, as Jack Brewster from NewsGuard puts it, some political misinformation does not have to be AI generated to go viral on any platform.
What goes viral on these platforms is sensationalism, I should say. And because of that, when we are typing in just basic terms about the 2024 election, we're often not going to get where our polling station is, or basic information that could be helpful to anyone across the political lines.
Doesn't this remind you of one of our previous conversations, Kimberly, where someone said to us, misinformation, it's always a thing in moments like this. It's just the mode by which that misinformation and disinformation is dispensed that changes over time.
Right. I mean, and misinformation can come via a text message, an email, older technology. It doesn't need to be fancy, but we have to be quite advanced as we are on our guard.
Yeah. And for folks who are on TikTok, we should note they have suggested search results that pop up at the bottom of each political candidate's video that will direct users to vote.org, which has specific voter information about your state. So folks should check that out. Kimberly Adams, senior Washington correspondent for us here at Marketplace. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily.
And thanks to all of you for joining us for another episode of Decoding Democracy. We're going to be taking a short summer hiatus, and we're going to return in September with brand new episodes to help you navigate the final months of the election season. In the meantime, we would love to hear from you, so please leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Jesus Alvarado produced this episode, and I'm Lily Jamali.